This is the reading of chapter 22 in Lester Sumrall's book, My Story to His Glory. Feed your faith and starve your doubts. We moved to Manila with equipment and supplies to begin the work there in good shape. When we returned to the United States, we arrived only with our personal belongings in our suitcases. Freely we had received at the hand of the Lord and God's faithful people, and freely we would give. Thousands were at the Manila airport to see us off. We left amid many tears, the warm embraces of these people whom we had come to love so very much. They, in turn, loved us. But we left confident that we were doing God's will, and knowing that the work was in the hand of fine pastors. Publicly and knowing privately that we had taught the people that their greatest love was to be for the Lord Jesus, and that their security was in Him and not in any human being. Returning to South Bend seemed almost like a dream. It was like we had never been away. The church needed us. The pastor who had followed me had moved on elsewhere, and it seemed right and good to be back among the faithful people. The crowd surged and the work expanded. The blessings of God were evident upon the church and her people. At the same time, the congregation understood my calling and burden for the world evangelism and gave me freedom in traveling and ministering in various parts of the world. On a Saturday morning in 1956, I sensed that the Lord was once again speaking to me about another city where there was work to be done for Him. This time it was Jerusalem. So it was that in October of that year, I took a 6-month leave of absence from South Bend Pastorate and moved my family almost 6,000 miles to the Holy City. While there, I served as pastor in one of the churches and held prophecy rallies in Jerusalem YMCA building. It wasn't easy, we discovered, to witness to the Jew, but my wife, as in other places, proved to be a real asset for the work and blessing and help to many. I think it was in Jerusalem that we both really began to understand about feeding our faith and starving our doubts. God gave us ample opportunity to exercise our faith. We found that many of the Jewish people didn't even believe in the God of the Old Testament. So, how could they believe in the Son of God? Ours was a real teaching ministry, often on a one-to-one basis. Early one morning, I walked a few blocks from where we were living to a craggy rock overhanging the valley of Hinnom. From there, I could see Zion's Hill, the ancient walls of Old Jerusalem and the Wailing Wall, the Mount of Olives with the Garden of Gethsemane, and the road to Bethlehem. I had gone there to pray, and there God spoke to my heart. Lester, you are responsible for taking 1 million souls to heaven. It was a precious time as I alternately prayed and sought to hear God's still small voice deep in the inner recesses of my heart. I asked Him, God, how is that possible? Humanly, I staggered at the task. Quietly, as I sat there alone, communing with the Lord, into my mind He put these thoughts. It was the idea of 2 plowmen, one plowing deep and the other wide. Deep was my responsibility, and wide the opportunity. I was to share the vision with partners of the same spirit and spread the gospel message by utilizing the mass media, the written word, full-time gospel radio, deliverance films, and whatever means would come my way in the ensuing years. I was reminded of the millions of depressed and possessed human beings who needed deliverance from satanic forces, and once again my mind returned to my long-ago vision of souls on the road to hell. This was my calling, and I would be true to it. One weekend we were sightseeing in Tiberias, near the Sea of Galilee. We had rented a little house and were sleeping on the bottom floor just below ground level. All night long we heard rumbling like thunder, and yet it was different. I turned to my wife and said, "Honey, that's not normal. Something unusual is happening." We remembered that earlier in the afternoon we had noticed many young men rushing from their homes and shops as if they were in a terrible hurry to get somewhere. We didn't get much sleep the rest of the night and early morning. When we got up, we realized that the rumbling noise had been heavy trucks speeding down the road. When we returned to Jerusalem, we saw what seemed to be thousands of tanks covered with camouflage on their way to meet the Egyptian invaders. Israel had entered what became known as the Sinai War. We lived through the nightmarish time of blackouts and terror. On Monday, we sent our sons to the British school that they attended. Usually they were 300 students, but that day our boys returned saying they were the only ones who had gone to school. Everyone, it seemed, had evacuated. Even the American ambassador was gone. Insofar as we knew, we were the only family of Americans left in that part of Jerusalem. But God had sent me to Israel for 6 months, and I wasn't going to leave just because they were having a war. Anyway, it made no difference to me if my family and I went to heaven from Israel or from the United States. I applied for and received permission from the government to travel through the battle zone as a press correspondent. During this time, I wrote numerous magazine and newspaper articles about the Israeli-Egyptian conflict in light of Bible prophecy, and I began publishing my own prophecy newsletter, which was circulated around the world. In March 1957, when the Second Arab-Israeli War was over, so was our leave. We returned to our church in South Bend, but after having heard from God in what I felt was such a definite leading, while seated on the rock overlooking the city, my mind was in a whirl. There was so much to do: increase the publication and circulation of literature, produce deliverance films, and increase our radio ministry. There was also the congregation in South Bend that needed the leading of a pastor who was there.